Rich boys always think money buys invincibility. Tonight, two spoiled brats decided a tired waitress looked like a fun target. Both cornered her, grabbed clippers, laughed while dirty blonde hair fell in messy clumps onto stained diner tiles. She refused to scream. She just stared at both men with cold, dead eyes, because she knew a secret. Her husband waited outside, and he wasn't just any angry husband. He owned every single soul in town. God save those fools. The smell of old frying oil and burnt filter coffee was practically baked into Sadie's DNA by now. It clung to the cheap polyester blend of her uniform, settled deep into the pores of her skin, and followed her all the way back to the sprawling, silent penthouse at the center of the city. She dragged a damp, bleach-soaked rag across the cracked red vinyl of Booth 4. Her feet ached. It was a dull, throbbing pain that radiated from her arches all the way up her calves, the kind of physical exhaustion that only came from carrying heavy trays and dealing with heavier attitudes for 10 hours straight. It was exactly what she wanted. Sadie didn't need to work at Ray's Diner. She didn't need to work at all. When your last name is Rossi, doors open before you even lift a hand to knock. People bow. They scrape. They offer you the world on a silver platter, usually while shaking with barely concealed terror. Her husband, Roman, was a man who moved mountains with a whispered phone call. He controlled the shipping ports, the local unions, and a vast, subterranean network of violence and leverage that kept the city's elite firmly under his thumb. But Sadie had grown up in a rusted trailer park 2 towns over. She knew what it meant to scrape dimes together for bus fare. Becoming Roman's wife had thrust her into a gilded cage of charity galas, armed guards, and suffocating luxury. She loved Roman. She loved him with a fierce, quiet desperation that sometimes terrified her. But she hated the cage. So she kept the diner job, under her maiden name. Roman, a man who routinely destroyed anyone who defied him, had simply sighed, kissed her forehead, and bought the building across the street so his men could watch her from a safe distance without being intrusive. Tonight, however, the detail had been pulled away for 30 minutes to handle a sudden police raid at one of the downtown warehouses. Sadie was alone. The bell above the glass door chimed, a harsh tinny sound that cut through the low hum of the refrigerators. Sadie didn't look up immediately. She scrubbed at a sticky ring of dried ketchup on the table. "Just find a seat," she called out, her voice raspy from a long shift. "I'll be right with you." "I don't think I want to find a seat. I think I want you to find one for me." The voice was arrogant, thick with the kind of lazy drawl that only came from old money and expensive liquor. Sadie finally straightened up, pushing a stray lock of dirty blonde hair behind her ear. 2 men stood in the entryway. They were in their late 20s, dressed in a way that screamed casual wealth. Cashmere sweaters, designer denim, watches that cost more than the diner itself. They were drunk, swaying slightly on their feet, their eyes glassy and cruel. The one who had spoken stepped forward. He had sharp, aristocratic features and a cruel twist to his mouth. This was Trent Dempsey. Sadie recognized him from a society magazine Roman had thrown in the trash a week ago. His father was a state senator, deeply entrenched in real estate corruption. Beside him stood his shadow, Logan, a stockier man with a flushed face and a mean, restless energy. "We're closing in 20 minutes, Sadie said, keeping her tone flat. She wiped her hands on her apron. "If you want coffee, I can give you a thermos to go." Trent laughed. It was a hollow, ugly sound. He walked past her, deliberately brushing his shoulder against hers, and slid into booth 6. Logan followed, kicking a chair out of the way. "We don't want coffee, sweetheart," Trent said, leaning back and resting his expensive leather boots on the opposite seat. "We want some food, a steak, medium rare, and you're going to stand there and watch us eat it." Sadie felt a familiar cold knot tighten in her stomach. She had dealt with men like this before, men who viewed the working class as interactive scenery. "We don't serve steak," Sadie said, refusing to break eye contact. "Burgers, fries, and eggs. That's it, and the grill is off." Logan slammed a hand down on the table, rattling the salt and pepper shakers. "Then turn it back on, you stupid bitch. Do you know who we are?" The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Sadie didn't flinch. She just stared at them. A cynical part of her mind almost found it funny. "Do you know who we are?" If they only knew who she was. If they only knew that a single text message from her cheap burner phone would have them both at the bottom of the river before sunrise. But Sadie wasn't Roman. She didn't want blood. She just wanted to finish her shift and go home. "I don't care who you are," Sadie said, her voice dropping an octave, losing the polite waitress customer service lilt. "The grill is off. You can leave, or I can call the cops." Trent's eyes narrowed. The drunken amusement vanished, replaced by a cold, spiteful rage. He hated being told no. He had never been told no in his entire miserable, privileged life. He slowly swung his legs off the seat and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. "Gary!" Trent barked, looking past Sadie toward the kitchen. Gary, the shift manager, poked his head out from the back. He was a balding, sweating man in his 50s who lived in a state of perpetual anxiety. When he saw Trent, his face went completely white. "Mr. Dempsey," Gary stammered, wiping his hands nervously on a towel. I didn't know you were coming in." "Tell your waitress to turn the grill on, Gary," Trent said, his voice deceptively soft. Gary looked at Sadie, pleading with his eyes. "Sadie, just make them some burgers. Please, it's fine." "Gary, the grill is bleached," Sadie said, her jaw tight. "I'm not serving them." Trent stood up. He reached into the inside pocket of his cashmere coat. Gary flinched, expecting a gun. But Trent pulled out a thick wad of bills. He peeled off $500 bills and dropped them onto the floor. "Take a walk, Gary," Trent said, his eyes locked onto Sadie. "Take a 30-minute walk. Lock the front door on your way out." Sadie turned to her manager. "Gary, don't." Gary stared at the money on the greasy floor. He swallowed hard. He looked at Trent, then at Logan, who had casually pulled a heavy switchblade from his pocket and was cleaning his fingernails with it. Gary broke. He didn't even pick up the money. He just untied his apron, dropped it on the counter, and practically ran for the back exit. The heavy metal door slammed shut, the sound echoing through the empty diner. Sadie was alone with them. The click of the deadbolt felt louder than a gunshot. Logan leaned against the front door, flipping the neon open sign to closed. He pulled down the cheap plastic blinds, cutting them off from the street outside. The only light left in the diner came from the buzzing fluorescent tubes overhead. Casting harsh, sickly shadows across the room, Sadie didn't back away. She stood her ground near the counter, her mind calculating the distance to the heavy coffee pots, the steak knives under the register, the emergency alarm button beneath the till. She checked the clock on the wall. 10:48 p.m. Roman was due in 12 minutes. She just had to stall. "You think you're tough, huh?" Trent sneered, stepping closer. He invaded her personal space, smelling of stale gin and expensive cologne. Look at you, wearing a name tag, making minimum wage. And you think you can talk down to me? I think you're pathetic, Sadie said. Her voice was steady, but her heart was hammering against her ribs. A grown man throwing a tantrum over a burger. Trent's hand snapped out faster than she expected. The backhand caught her across the cheekbone, the heavy gold ring on his index finger biting into her skin. The force of the blow sent Sadie stumbling backward, her hip crashing painfully against the edge of the counter. She tasted copper. Warm blood pooled in the corner of her mouth. She spat it onto the floor, wiping her lip with the back of her hand. Logan laughed. She's a feisty one, Trent. Think she needs to learn some manners. Oh, she's going to learn, Trent said, taking off his coat and laying it carefully across a stool. My girlfriend left me today, you know. Said I was too controlling. Said I didn't respect women. Can you believe that? I can't imagine why, Sadie muttered. Trent lunged. He grabbed her by the front of her uniform, lifting her slightly onto her toes, and slammed her hard against the counter. The breath left Sadie's lungs in a violent rush. Logan stepped up beside them, pocketing his knife and grabbing Sadie's wrists, pinning them behind her back. She struggled. She kicked, her heavy work shoes connecting with Trent's shin. He grunted in pain and punched her hard in the stomach. Sadie doubled over, gagging. All the fight temporarily drained out of her as she fought just to drag air into her lungs. Drag her to the chair, Trent ordered. Logan shoved her forward, forcing her down into the rolling office chair Gary kept near the register. He pulled a zip tie from his pocket, something he clearly carried for ugly situations, and secured her wrists to the armrests. Sadie breathed heavily, blood dripping from her split lip onto the collar of her uniform. She forced her mind into a quiet, detached place. Panic would get her killed. She looked at Trent, her expression entirely devoid of fear. It unsettled him. He wanted her to cry. He wanted her to beg. "What are you doing, Trent?" Logan asked, watching as Trent walked over to a shopping bag he had brought in with him. "Bought this at the 24-hour pharmacy down the street," Trent said, pulling out a heavy black cardboard box. He ripped it open, discarding the packaging onto the floor. Was going to shave the neighbor's stupid purebred poodle to piss them off, but I think I have a better use for it. He plugged the heavy-duty electric clippers into the wall outlet near the register. He flipped the switch. Bzzz. The motor roared to life, a loud, aggressive vibration that filled the quiet diner. Sadie's breath hitched. For the first time, a flicker of genuine alarm crossed her face. "Don't," she said, her voice tight. Trent smiled. It was a terrifying, genuine smile. "Why? Because you think your hair makes you pretty? Because you think you have something to be proud of? You're nothing. You serve me food. You wipe my tables. You don't get to look down on me." He stepped behind her. Logan grabbed Sadie's shoulders, holding her firmly in place. Sadie squeezed her eyes shut. She didn't scream. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. She bit down on the inside of her cheek so hard she tasted more blood. The cold metal teeth of the clippers pressed against her scalp, right at the nape of her neck. Trent pushed upward. Sadie felt the sudden, shocking absence of weight. She heard the agonizing crunch of thick hair being severed at the root. A long, dirty blonde lock slid down her shoulder and landed softly on her lap. "Look at that," Trent whispered in her ear. "You're already looking more like the trash you are." He brought the clippers back down and drove them up the center of her head. Sadie's neck muscles strained as she tried to pull away, but Logan held her rigid. The buzzing vibrated against her skull, vibrating through her teeth. Clump by clump, her identity was stripped away. The hair fell in a tragic, messy halo around the base of the chair. It stuck to the grease on the floor. It gathered in her lap. Trent wasn't careful. He was rough, the hot metal of the clippers scraping and burning her scalp, nicking the skin in several places. Blood beaded up on her bare head, mixing with her sweat. Logan watched, a twisted smirk on his face. "She looks like a sick dog." Trent laughed, turning off the clippers. He stepped back, admiring his work. Sadie's head was roughly shorn, patches of skin showing white and red through irregular, brutal stubble. She looked ravaged, violated. She sat perfectly still in the chair. The cold draft from the air conditioning vent hit her bare scalp, making her shiver. She slowly opened her eyes. They were completely devoid of emotion, staring straight ahead. "Say something," Trent demanded, wiping a loose strand of her hair from his sweater. "Apologize for disrespecting me." Sadie didn't blink. She just stared at the clock. 10:57 p.m. "I said speak!" Trent yelled, raising his hand to strike her again. Outside, a heavy black vehicle pulled up to the curb. It didn't park. It just stopped, idling with a low, menacing purr that vibrated through the cheap glass of the diner's front windows. Sadie looked at Trent. A slow, chilling smile touched the corners of her bloody mouth. "You're already dead," she whispered. Roman Rossi did not like deviations in routine. He operated in a world of absolute chaos, which meant his personal life required militant structure. Sadie always texted him at 10:45 p.m. when she was closing the register. He always arrived at 10:55 p.m. She would walk out at exactly 11 p.m., smelling of fries and bleach, and he would wrap his cashmere coat around her shoulders before pulling her into the armored SUV. Tonight, there was no text. Roman sat in the back of the Maybach, his dark eyes fixed on the diner across the street. The engine idled quietly. His driver, Carmine, gripped the steering wheel, sensing the sudden shift in the atmosphere. The air in the back seat had turned heavy, suffocating. Roman was a man sculpted from cold marble and quiet violence. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, no tie, the top 2 buttons of his shirt undone to reveal the faint scarring on his collarbone. He didn't look like a mob boss. He looked like a ruthless CEO. But the men who answered to him knew the truth. Roman didn't just order executions. He had built his empire with his own 2 hands, and those hands were stained permanently red. "The sign is off, boss," Carmine noted, his voice low. "Blinds are drawn." Roman looked at the dash clock. 10:58 p.m. Sadie never drew the blinds until 11:15 when she was mopping the floors. He didn't say a word. He just opened the door and stepped out into the damp night air. He crossed the street with measured, predatory steps. He didn't rush. Rushing implied panic, and Roman Rossi never panicked. He approached the glass door of Ray's diner. He tried the handle. Locked. He leaned close to the glass, peering through a small gap between the plastic blinds and the window frame. For a fraction of a second, Roman's heart stopped beating. He saw the overturned chairs. He saw the blood on the linoleum. And then he saw her, Sadie, bound to a chair, her beautiful hair, the hair he loved to bury his face in when the nightmares woke him, gone, shaved, hacked away. Blood trickled down the side of her neck from a nick on her scalp. Standing over her were 2 men laughing. Something inside Roman fractured. It didn't break with a loud snap. It splintered quietly, a silent collapsing of every human boundary that kept his darkest demons in check. He didn't feel anger. Anger was hot. Anger was loud. What Roman felt was absolute zero. He stepped back from the door. He didn't reach for a brick. He didn't yell. He reached beneath his tailored jacket and unholstered a suppressed .45 caliber pistol. He raised it calmly, aiming perfectly at the deadbolt mechanism. Pat. The muffled crack of the gunshot was barely louder than a hand clap. The heavy deadbolt shattered, brass and steel splintering inward. Roman kicked the door once. It flew open, the bell above it letting out a distorted, dying chime as it slammed against the interior wall. Inside, Trent and Logan spun around. Trent dropped the clippers. They clattered noisily against the tiles. "Hey," Trent barked, his drunken bravado masking his sudden shock. "We're closed, pal. Get the hell out of here before I call the cops." Roman didn't look at them. He walked through the diner, his leather shoes crunching softly over the shattered glass of the door lock. The fluorescent lights overhead buzzed. The smell of burning hair motor and stale grease filled his nose. He holstered his weapon smoothly, never taking his eyes off Sadie. He approached the chair. Sadie looked up at him. Her stoic facade finally cracked. A single tear tracked through the blood and dust on her cheek. She didn't look ashamed. She looked exhausted. Roman sank to one knee, ignoring the grease, ignoring the clumps of hair that stained his expensive trousers. He reached out with trembling, agonizingly gentle hands, cupping her face. His thumbs brushed over her cheekbones, wiping away the tear and the blood. He looked at her shorn head. He leaned in and pressed a soft, lingering kiss to her bare, scratched scalp. "I'm sorry I was late, amore mio," he whispered, his voice a gravelly, beautiful hum. He pulled a small pocket knife from his trousers and sliced the zip ties binding her wrists. Sadie immediately slumped forward into his chest. Roman caught her, wrapping his arms around her tightly. He shrugged off his heavy, expensive suit jacket and draped it over her shoulders, covering her trembling frame. Trent watched this exchange, entirely confused. His alcohol-addled brain was struggling to process the scene. He puffed out his chest, stepping forward. "Hey, deaf mute," Trent snarled. "I said we're closed. You think you can just bust in here and touch my mess?" Roman slowly stood up. He left Sadie sitting in the chair, wrapped securely in his coat. He finally turned to look at the two men. Roman's face was completely devoid of expression. His dark eyes were bottomless pits, absorbing the terrible light of the diner and reflecting nothing back. He didn't say a word. He just stared at them. Logan, the slightly more sober of the two, felt a sudden icy prickle of dread crawl up his spine. He looked at the man's tailored clothes. He looked at the way he held himself, not like a man ready to fight, but like a man who had already decided how the fight was going to end. Then Logan looked down at Roman's left hand. On the back of Roman's hand, just below the knuckle, was a small, faded tattoo of a black crown. Logan's father, the chief of police, had pointed that tattoo out to him once at a distance during a charity gala. "You see that man, Logan?" his father had said, sweating profusely. "If he ever looks at you, you look at the floor. You don't speak. You don't breathe. That is Roman Rossi." Logan's face drained of color. His knees literally buckled, sending him stumbling backward until he hit the counter. "Trent?" Logan choked out, his voice cracking violently. "Trent, shut up!" "What?" Trent snapped, oblivious. He took another step toward Roman. "Who the fuck do you think you are, buddy? You know who my father is?" Roman tilted his head slightly. The silence stretched, thick and suffocating, until finally Roman spoke. "Arthur Dempsey," Roman said softly. "State Senator. Lives at 4421 Crestview Drive. He has a pacemaker. And a mistress in Southside. He pays out of a shell company." Trent froze. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. Roman took a single measured step forward. "He's a useful man," Roman continued, his tone conversational, though the air around him felt like it was freezing over. "I had dinner with him last Tuesday. I told him he had a bright future in this city so long as he remembered who owned it." Roman looked down at the clippers on the floor. He looked at the locks of blonde hair scattered across the dirty tiles. Then he raised his dark eyes back to Trent. "But as of 60 seconds ago," Roman whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying, unholy promise, "Arthur Dempsey's bloodline ends tonight." Trent Dempsey was a creature built on consequence-free living. When he broke a window, a check was written. When he crashed a sports car, a newer model appeared in the driveway. His brain fundamentally lacked the neural pathways to process immediate mortal danger. So when Roman Rossi promised the end of his bloodline, Trent didn't freeze. He swung. He threw a sloppy, gin-fueled right hook aimed squarely at Roman's jaw. Roman didn't duck. He barely even shifted his weight. He simply raised his left forearm, deflecting the blow with the brutal efficiency of a steel beam. The impact sent a shockwave up Trent's arm, numbing his triceps. Before Trent could register the pain, Roman's right hand snapped forward. He didn't punch Trent. He grabbed him by the throat. Roman's fingers dug into the soft tissue beneath Trent's jawline, cutting off his windpipe instantly. He lifted Trent an inch off the greasy linoleum and slammed him backward into the edge of the Formica counter. The sickening crack of Trent's lower ribs fracturing echoed in the dead air of the diner. Trent gagged, his eyes bulging, his manicured hands clawing uselessly at Roman's wrist. It was like trying to pry off an industrial vice. "You think power is a credit card and a last name," Roman said. His voice remained perfectly level, conversational, completely devoid of the exertion ripping through Trent's body. "Power is the absolute certainty that no one is coming to save you." Roman stepped onto the pin, applying more pressure to Trent's shattered ribs. Trent let out a high, wet squeal, a sound completely stripped of dignity. His face turned a deep, mottled purple. Logan watched his friend die. He knew he was watching a murder. The realization finally unspooled the last threads of his courage. He backed away, his heavy boots slipping on a patch of spilled coffee, and bolted for the kitchen. He hit the swinging aluminum doors hard, bursting into the prep area. He scrambled past the industrial fryers and the walk-in freezer, his chest heaving, his mind screaming a single command: run. He reached the heavy steel fire door at the back. He threw his entire weight against the crash bar. It didn't budge. Logan slammed against it again, sobbing now, tears mixing with the sweat on his flushed face. He pounded his fists against the reinforced steel. "Looking for a way out?" The voice came from the shadows near the loading dock entrance. A man stepped forward into the dim, fluorescent light of the kitchen. It was Carmine. He wore a dark top coat and leather gloves, holding a suppressed Heckler and Coke MP7 casually at his side. Two other men, dressed equally in black, stepped out from behind the dry storage racks. They didn't look angry. They looked like men clocking in for a shift, Logan dropped to his knees. The damp linoleum soaked through his expensive denim. "Please," he hyperventilated, holding his hands up. "My dad is the chief of police. I didn't touch her. Trent did it. Trent had the clippers. I swear to God." Carmine walked over slowly. He looked down at Logan with the mild disgust one might reserve for a cockroach on a clean floor. "Your father took $100,000 from Mr. Rossi last month to look the other way on a dock shipment," Carmine said, his voice a low, gravelly rumble. "He doesn't own this city, kid. He just rents a desk." Carmine raised a heavy steel-toed boot and kicked Logan squarely in the temple. Logan's eyes rolled back, and he collapsed onto the tiles like a dropped sack of flour. Back in the main dining area, Roman finally released his grip on Trent's throat. Trent slumped to the floor, gasping frantically for air, hacking up spittle and blood onto his own cashmere sweater. He clutched his ribs, curling into a fetal position among the clumps of Sadie's severed hair. He was weeping openly, a pathetic, broken sound. Roman didn't look at him anymore. Trent was no longer a person. He was an item on a checklist. Roman turned back to the chair. Sadie sat perfectly still, swallowed by his oversized suit jacket. She was staring blankly at the neon sign buzzing weakly in the window. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold, hollow shock of the assault. Roman knelt in front of her again. The violence of the last 2 minutes vanished from his posture. He became entirely centered on her. "Can you walk, Sadie?" he asked softly. She blinked, pulling her gaze away from the window to look at him. She saw the knuckles of his left hand, slightly bruised from deflection. She saw the absolute, terrifying devotion in his dark eyes. "It's cold," she whispered, her voice cracking. Roman's jaw tightened, a fleeting tell of the rage simmering beneath his skin. He stood, gathering her carefully into his arms. He lifted her against his chest as easily as if she weighed nothing at all. Sadie buried her face into the crook of his neck, breathing in the scent of cedar and gunpowder. Carmine pushed through the swinging kitchen door, stepping over Trent's pathetic, sobbing form. "The back is secure, boss," Carmine said quietly. "The other one is out cold." "Bag them both," Roman ordered, his tone glacial. "Take them to the meat-packing facility on 4th. Hang them up. Do not let them bleed out." "And the diner?" "Burn it to the foundation," Roman said, stepping carefully over the shattered glass of the front door. "Leave the safe open. Make it look like a robbery gone wrong." Carmine nodded. Understood. Roman carried his wife out of the stale, greasy air of the diner and into the cool dampness of the city night. He didn't look back as the flames began to lick the inside of the kitchen. The interior of the Maybach was a fortress. The doors sealed with the heavy, reassuring thud of a bank vault, muting the sounds of the sirens wailing in the distance. The windows were tinted black, armored against high-caliber rounds. Inside, it smelled of rich leather and the faint, sterile scent of ozone from the climate control system. Roman laid Sadie gently onto the wide back seat. He slid in beside her, pulling a small black leather medical kit from a concealed compartment beneath the armrest. The privacy partition separating them from the new driver, a silent man named Paul, slid up with a soft whir. They were completely alone. Sadie sat rigid, the oversized suit jacket bunched around her shoulders. She reached up instinctively to push her hair behind her ear. Her fingers met empty air, then scraped against the harsh, uneven stubble on her scalp. She flinched. A sharp intake of breath hissed through her teeth. "Don't touch it," Roman murmured, leaning close. He unlatched the medical kit. "Your hands aren't clean." He pulled out a heavy cotton swab and a bottle of high-grade surgical antiseptic. He clicked a small reading light on above them, casting a warm, concentrated glow over the back seat. "Turn your head," he said gently. Sadie complied, staring blankly at the illuminated buttons on the door panel. Roman inspected the damage. Trent had been sloppy and malicious. There were several deep nicks along the nape of her neck and a longer jagged scratch just behind her left ear where the hot metal teeth of the clippers had dug into the skin. Roman uncapped the antiseptic. "This will sting." He applied the soaked cotton to the longest scratch. Sadie hissed, her hands gripping the leather seat, her knuckles turning white. Roman didn't apologize. He knew pain required focus, not pity. He worked methodically, his large, dangerous hands moving with surgical precision over her ravaged scalp. He cleaned every nick, every scrape, wiping away the dried blood that had tracked down her neck. He felt her trembling. It wasn't a violent shake, but a deep internal vibration, the body's delayed reaction to severe trauma. "Breathe, Sadie," he commanded softly, capping the bottle. "Slowly, in through your nose." She tried, but the breath caught in her chest, breaking into a ragged sob. She squeezed her eyes shut, finally letting the tears fall. They tracked through the grime on her face, dropping silently onto the leather upholstery. "I look like a monster," she choked out. It was a vain thought, she knew, a superficial concern compared to what could have happened. But the violation felt visceral. They had stripped away a piece of her identity just because they were bored. Roman dropped the cotton swab into a waste bin. He reached out, taking her face in both of his hands. He forced her to look at him. "Look at me," he demanded, his voice dropping to a register that commanded absolute obedience. Sadie opened her watery eyes, meeting his dark, intense gaze. "You are my wife," Roman said, emphasizing every single syllable. "You are Sadie Rossi. You could be stripped to the bone. You could be scarred beyond recognition. And you would still command a room. Your hair does not make you powerful. You make you powerful." He leaned in, his forehead resting gently against hers. He didn't care about the grease or the sweat. "They thought they were humiliating a waitress," Roman whispered, his breath warm against her lips. "They didn't realize they were touching a queen, and they will pay for that mistake in currencies they didn't know existed." Sadie let out a shaky breath, her hands coming up to grip his forearms. He felt like solid rock beneath her fingers, an anchor in a violently shifting sea. "They were going to kill me, Roman," she admitted, the truth finally settling into her bones. "Trent, the way he looked at me, he was empty." "He was an amateur," Roman corrected, pulling back slightly to look at her. "Amateurs play with their food because they don't know how to hunt. They rely on fear, but fear is cheap." He reached over and pulled a heavy cashmere blanket from the compartment, draping it over her legs, tucking it securely around her waist. "I'm done with the diner," Sadie said quietly, staring at her hands. "I thought it kept me grounded. I thought it reminded me of who I used to be before all this." She gestured vaguely at the luxury of the car. "But it just made me a target." "You were trying to hold on to a ghost," Roman said gently. "There is no before anymore, Sadie. There is only us. And anyone who touches what is mine ceases to exist." The car glided smoothly onto the private access ramp of their high-rise building, plunging them into the subterranean gloom of the secure garage. The engine cut off. Roman didn't wait for Paul to open the door. He kicked it open himself, lifting Sadie into his arms once more. He carried her to the private elevator, swiping his biometric ring against the scanner. The doors slid shut, sealing them in a steel box rocketing toward the penthouse. "I want a shower," Sadie mumbled against his collarbone, exhaustion finally dragging her down into a heavy narcotic lethargy. "I want to scrub this smell off me." "You'll sleep first," Roman decided. "I will clean you. I will handle it." The elevator chimed, opening directly into the foyer of the penthouse. It was a sprawling expanse of floor-to-ceiling glass, dark wood, and cold marble. The city lights glittered below them, millions of ignorant souls sleeping in the dark, completely unaware of the invisible wars being fought above their heads. Roman carried her to the master bedroom. He set her down on the edge of the massive bed, pulling off her cheap, blood-stained uniform shoes. He unbuttoned the ruined diner uniform, stripping it away until she was just in her undergarments. He wrapped her in a thick heated robe, pulling the hood up to cover her bare, scratched scalp. He tucked her into the bed, pulling the heavy duvet up to her chin. He sat on the edge of the mattress, watching her until her breathing evened out, until the exhausted lines of her face smoothed into a deep, dreamless sleep. Only then did Roman stand up. He walked into the adjoining master bathroom. He turned on the sink, staring at his reflection in the mirror. He looked perfectly composed. His suit was slightly wrinkled, his shirt unbuttoned, but his face was an impenetrable mask. He looked down at his hands. He turned on the hot water, letting it scald his skin as he scrubbed Trent Dempsey's blood from under his fingernails. The time for gentleness was over. Now the machine had to wake up. Roman's study was a soundproof vault at the far end of the penthouse. It contained no art, no personal photographs, no distractions. It housed a massive mahogany desk, a bank of encrypted servers, and a panoramic view of the financial district. He walked in, shutting the heavy oak door behind him. The lock engaged with a heavy, satisfying thunk. He didn't sit down. He walked to the window, staring out at the illuminated skyline. He pulled a sleek, encrypted satellite phone from his pocket. He didn't use a contact list. He punched in a 20-digit numerical sequence from memory. It rang twice. "Speak," a voice answered. It was Vincent, Roman's chief financial architect. A man who could crash a small country's economy with a laptop and a cup of coffee. "Arthur Dempsey," Roman said. "The state senator?" Vincent asked, the clicking of a keyboard already audible in the background. "I have his file. We've been letting him skim off the municipal housing contracts for 18 months. He's useful." "He's obsolete," Roman corrected. "Liquidate him." The keyboard clicking paused for a fraction of a second. "Total extraction?" "I want him destitute by sunrise," Roman ordered, his voice cold and precise. "Drain his offshore accounts in the Caymans. Reroute the funds through the shell companies in Malta, then burn the bridges. Foreclose on the Crestview property. Trigger the margin calls on his stock portfolio. And Vincent?" "Yes, Mr. Rossi?" "Take the blackmail file on his mistress, the one with the photographs of him using campaign funds for her condo. Send it to the state prosecutor, the local news anchors, and his wife's private email. Simultaneously." "It will be done in 20 minutes, Vincent promised. He'll wake up to nothing." Roman hung up. He didn't feel a surge of triumph. Destroying a man's life financially was just data entry. It was the prologue. He dialed a second number. "Rossi," answered Dominic, the head of Roman's enforcement division. Dominic was a ghost, a man who organized violence with the meticulous care of a wedding planner. "Status," Roman demanded. "Carmine brought the packages to the meat packing plant on 4th, Dominic reported. "They are conscious. They are hanging from the rails. The younger one, Logan, has wet himself twice. The Dempsey boy is demanding a lawyer." Roman exhaled slowly, watching a plane blink across the night sky. "Is the freezer active?" "Set to -20 degrees Fahrenheit." "Good," Roman said. "Take Logan's phone. Send a text to his father, the police chief. Tell him his son decided to take a spontaneous trip to Europe and won't be reachable. Then break the phone." "And the Dempsey boy?" "Leave him hanging," Roman instructed. "Let him feel the cold. Let his shattered ribs ache in the freezing air. I want him awake and entirely aware of his surroundings." "How long do we hold them, boss?" Roman turned away from the window, walking over to his desk. He opened a heavy humidor, taking out a cigar but not lighting it. He just rolled the dry tobacco between his fingers, appreciating the tactile sensation. "Until Arthur Dempsey realizes he has nothing left to offer," Roman said softly. "The senator is going to wake up tomorrow morning to a destroyed career, a frozen bank account, and a wife filing for divorce. He will try to call his son for comfort." "His son won't answer," Dominic noted, a grim smile evident in his tone. "Exactly. Arthur will panic. He will reach out to his contacts and he will realize he has none. By noon, he will be a ghost in his own city." Roman snapped the unlit cigar in half, dropping the pieces into an ashtray. "At precisely 1 p.m., you will call him. You will tell him his son's location. You're giving him a chance to save the boy?" Dominic asked, genuinely surprised. "No," Roman corrected, his eyes narrowing into cold slits. "I am giving him the address so he can arrive exactly in time to watch what happens when you touch my wife. You will set up a live feed in the freezer. When Arthur Dempsey walks through the door, you will start the industrial meat grinders, and you will ensure Trent Dempsey is slowly lowered into them, feet first." Silence hung on the line for a long moment. Even Dominic, a man forged in blood, took a second to process the sheer biblical weight of the execution order. "What about Logan?" Dominic finally asked. "Logan watched," Roman said, remembering the way the boy had smirked while Sadie's hair fell to the floor. "He is an audience member. Chain him to the wall. Make him watch Trent. When it's over, leave Logan locked in the freezer. Turn off the lights. Weld the door shut. It will be done, Mr. Rossi." Roman ended the call. He set the phone down on the polished wood of the desk. The machine was awake. The gears were turning. By tomorrow evening, the Dempsey name would be nothing more than a cautionary whisper in the dark corners of the city's elite. He walked out of the study, the heavy door locking automatically behind him. He returned to the master bedroom. The room was dark, save for the faint glow of the city filtering through the sheer curtains. Sadie was still asleep, curled onto her side, her breathing deep and even. Roman stripped off his clothes, tossing the ruined shirt and trousers onto the floor. He climbed into the bed, sliding under the heavy duvet. He didn't touch her. He didn't want to wake her. But he positioned himself close enough to feel the radiant heat of her body. He closed his eyes. The rage that had been burning inside him like a cold star began to slowly bank down to embers. They took her hair. They took her dignity for a few fleeting minutes in a greasy diner. But Roman had taken their entire world, and he would sleep soundly, knowing it. Arthur Dempsey woke to the smell of nothing. Usually by 7 a.m., The massive stone kitchen of his Crestview Drive estate smelled of roasting Jamaican Blue Mountain coffee and the expensive floral perfume his wife Eleanor bathed in. Today, the air was stagnant, cold. Arthur sat up, rubbing the sleep from his eyes. He was a man who carried his 60 years well, his silver hair perfectly coiffed even in bed, his jawline maintained by expensive surgeons. He swung his legs out of the silk sheets and walked down the sweeping mahogany staircase. The house was eerily silent. "Eleanor," he called out. No answer. He walked into the kitchen. The espresso machine was cold. He frowned, reaching for his phone on the marble island. He tapped the screen. It was dead. Not out of battery. The screen displayed a stark white system failure icon. He tossed it aside and picked up the kitchen landline. No dial tone. A prickle of unease finally broke through his morning fog. Arthur walked into his private study to use the secure line. As he booted up his desktop computer, he noticed a thick manila envelope sitting squarely on the center of his leather blotter. His name was written on it in sharp black ink. Arthur opened it. Inside were printed bank statements, his offshore accounts in the Caymans, his discretionary fund, his campaign treasury. Every single balance line read the exact same number, $0. "What the hell is this?" he muttered, his heart giving a sudden painful lurch. He flipped to the next page. It was a high-resolution photograph of him entering a run-down condo building in Southside. The next photo was of his mistress, a 22-year-old paralegal wearing a diamond necklace he had bought her using municipal tax rebates. The third piece of paper was a printed email receipt. The photos had been sent to the State Ethics Committee, the district attorney, the local news stations, and Eleanor. The sound of the front door opening and slamming shut echoed through the house. Arthur rushed into the foyer. Eleanor was standing by the door, dressed in a sharp beige trench coat, holding a single leather overnight bag. Her face was a mask of absolute icy disgust. "Eleanor, wait!" Arthur choked out, holding up the papers. "This is a setup. It's a hack. I can explain." "My attorneys will contact you by noon," Eleanor said. Her voice didn't waver. "Though I doubt you'll be able to afford one to respond. The bank called me on my cell 20 minutes ago. They're foreclosing on the house. The locks are being changed at 3 o'clock. They can't do that. I'm a state senator." "You're a corpse, Arthur," she said, opening the door. "And I don't sleep with dead men." She walked out, the heavy oak door clicking shut behind her. Arthur stood frozen in the foyer. The walls of his carefully constructed life were not just cracking. They had vaporized. He ran back to the study, panic finally seizing him by the throat. He grabbed the secure line. He dialed his campaign manager. Disconnected. He dialed his broker. Disconnected. He dialed Trent. The phone rang out to voicemail. "Hey, it's Trent. Leave a message or don't." "I don't care." "Trent, call me back immediately," Arthur said, his voice trembling violently. "Something is happening. Someone is coming after us. Come to the house. Now." He hung up. He paced the floor. By 10 a.m., the local news van started parking at the bottom of his driveway. By 11 a.m., he watched on his muted television as the governor held a live press conference formally demanding his resignation. By noon, his stomach was tied in agonizing knots, and he had thrown up twice in the downstairs powder room. He was entirely alone, stripped bare. At exactly 1 p.m., the secure line on his desk rang. It was the only phone in the house that still functioned. Arthur lunged for it, knocking over a crystal paperweight. Hello? Who is this? What do you want? Arthur Dempsey, a calm, gravelly voice said. Who are you? I'll give you whatever you want. Just stop this. You've ruined me. I haven't even started, the voice replied. Your son is currently at the meatpacking facility on 4th Street, Building C, Loading Dock 4. He is waiting for you. Trent? What does Trent have to do with this? You have 20 minutes to arrive, the voice said, completely ignoring the question. If you are late, you will miss the show. The line went dead. Arthur didn't think. The primal instinct to protect his bloodline overrode the shock of his financial ruin. He grabbed the keys to his Range Rover and practically sprinted through the garage. He tore out of the driveway, ignoring the flashes of the press cameras, and sped toward the industrial district. The meatpacking facility on 4th Street was a massive, windowless concrete block that looked like a mausoleum. The air around it smelled perpetually of iron and bleach. Arthur slammed his car into park near Loading Dock 4. The heavy corrugated metal door was rolled up halfway. He slid under it, his dress shoes slipping on the wet concrete floor. Trent? Arthur yelled. His voice echoed off the tile walls. A man stepped out from the shadows near a massive industrial scale. It was Dominic. He wore a heavy insulated parka and held a thick steel remote control in his gloved hand. Senator, Dominic said, nodding politely. Right this way. Where is my son? Arthur demanded, trying to project authority he no longer possessed. You are committing a federal crime. I want to see my son. You will, Dominic said. He turned and walked toward a massive steel door with a thick frost buildup around the hinges. Above the door, a red digital display read, -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Dominic unlatched the heavy bar and pulled the door open. Thick white vapor spilled out into the hallway, carrying the intense, biting cold of the deep freeze. Inside! Arthur hesitated. The primal part of his brain screamed at him to run. But he stepped into the white fog. The freezer was cavernous. Rows of heavy steel hooks hung from automated tracks on the ceiling, meant for sides of beef. But today, the tracks were mostly empty, except for 2 shapes hanging in the center of the room. Arthur gasped. Trent was suspended from his wrists by heavy iron chains attached to the ceiling track. He was stripped to his waist, his skin a horrifying mottled blue. His lips were cracked and bleeding, his chest heaving with shallow, agonizingly slow breaths. The cold had paralyzed his nervous system. To his right, Logan was chained to a heavy steel support beam. He was fully dressed, but shivering so violently his teeth sounded like castanets. He looked up at Arthur, his eyes wide with absolute shattered terror. "Trent!" Arthur screamed, running forward. Before he could reach his son, 2 men stepped out from the vapor, grabbing Arthur by the arms. They forced him to his knees on the frosted concrete, 10 feet away from Trent. "Dad," Trent croaked. The word barely left his throat. His eyes were glazed over, but a flicker of hope sparked in them. "Dad, help me." Arthur struggled against the men holding him. "Let him down. Take the money. Take the house. Just let him go." Dominic stepped into the freezer, his breath pluming in the air. He walked over to a massive industrial machine bolted to the floor directly beneath the ceiling tracks. It was a primary breakdown grinder, a terrifying assembly of exposed, churning steel gears and heavy rotating blades designed to crush bone and gristle. "You don't have a house, Arthur," Dominic said calmly. "You don't have money. You have nothing." Dominic looked up at the ceiling track. He pressed a button on his remote. The mechanical gears overhead whined. The track engaged. Trent's chains rattled loudly as he was slowly moved forward, stopping precisely above the open hopper of the meat grinder. "Wait! Stop!" Arthur shrieked, his voice breaking. "What did he do? Tell me what he did." Dominic looked at Arthur. "He took a pair of clippers, and he shaved the head of Sadie Rossi." The name hit Arthur like a physical blow. The air in his lungs vanished. Rossi. Every politician, every cop, every judge in the city knew that name. It was the third rail. You didn't touch it. You didn't even look at it. Arthur looked at his son. Trent didn't understand the name. Trent was just a spoiled boy who had picked on the wrong waitress. He didn't know, Arthur begged, tears freezing on his cheeks. He's an idiot. He was drunk. Please. He didn't know. Ignorance is not a defense, Dominic said. Dominic pressed the green button on the grinder. With a deafening mechanical roar, the massive steel blades inside the hopper began to spin. The noise was absolute, vibrating through the concrete floor, drowning out the hum of the refrigeration units. "No! No!" Arthur screamed, thrashing wildly against the men holding him. Dominic pressed another button on the remote. The motorized winch holding Trent's chains whirred to life. Trent let out a weak, raspy scream as he felt himself being lowered, inch by inch. The freezing air rushing past his legs was replaced by the mechanical heat of the churning blades below him. "Dad!" Trent screamed, the adrenaline finally overriding the hypothermia. He kicked his legs frantically, but there was nothing to kick against. "Dad, please!" Arthur sobbed, watching his son descend. "Take me, please! Let him go and take me!" Dominic didn't blink. He didn't smile. He just held the button. Trent's bare feet breached the top of the hopper. Logan, chained to the wall, closed his eyes and began to scream. A high, unbroken wail of absolute horror. The winch didn't stop. Arthur squeezed his eyes shut and buried his face into his chest. He couldn't watch, but he couldn't stop the sound. The sickening wet crunch of bone-meeting industrial steel echoed over the roar of the motor. Trent's scream hit a pitch that didn't sound human, and then mercifully it was cut short. The machine churned. 10 seconds later, Dominic released the button on the winch. He pressed the red kill switch on the grinder. The heavy steel blade slowed, grinding to a halt. The deafening noise faded, replaced by the humming of the freezer and the sound of Logan violently vomiting in the corner. Arthur didn't look up. He stayed on his knees, his forehead pressed against the freezing concrete, his body racked with dry, silent heaves. "Your bloodline ends today, Arthur," Dominic said. The lack of emotion in his voice was the most terrifying part of all. "You are free to leave. Live a long, miserable life in the dirt." The men released Arthur. He didn't stand. He just stayed curled on the floor, a hollowed-out husk of a man. Dominic turned his attention to Logan. Logan was hyperventilating, choking on his own sick, pulling frantically at the chains binding him to the pillar. "Mr. Rossi wanted me to pass along a message," Dominic said, walking toward the exit. "I won't tell," Logan sobbed, his voice shredded. "I swear to God, I didn't do anything. I just watched." "Exactly," Dominic said. He stepped out into the hallway. He grabbed the heavy steel handle of the freezer door. "No, wait! Don't leave me in here!" Logan screamed, the chains rattling furiously. "Please!" "Enjoy the view," Dominic said. He slammed the heavy door shut. The lock engaged with a loud final click. A moment later, the overhead lights in the freezer snapped off, plunging Logan into absolute freezing darkness. Outside, Carmine stepped forward with a heavy industrial welding torch. He pulled down his mask, ignited the flame, and began to seal the edges of the freezer door to the frame. The morning sun filtered heavily through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long, warm geometric shadows across the hardwood floor. Sadie woke up slowly. For a few blissful seconds, the exhaustion held the memory of the diner at bay. She stretched, feeling the heavy, expensive cotton of the sheets against her skin. Then, she shifted her head against the pillow. The friction was wrong. Instead of the soft slide of hair, she felt the rough, harsh catch of uneven stubble dragging against the pillowcase. The memory crashed down on her all at once. The smell of the motor, the cold metal teeth against her scalp, the blood. She sat up violently, her heart hammering against her ribs. She threw the duvet off and practically ran into the master bathroom. She stopped in front of the massive double vanity mirror. She gripped the edges of the marble counter, forcing herself to look up. It was worse than she imagined. Her head was a jagged, ugly mess. Trent hadn't shaved her. He had butchered her. Patches of skin showed through ragged tufts of dirty blonde hair. Deep red scratches crisscrossed the nape of her neck. She looked like a survivor of something horrific. A victim. Tears immediately pricked the corners of her eyes, hot and humiliating. "You aren't what they made you." Sadie jumped, spinning around. Roman was leaning against the door frame. He wore a simple black t-shirt and gray sweatpants. The expensive suits, the violence of the night before, all of it was stripped away, leaving only the man beneath. He held a small leather case in his hand. He walked slowly toward her, his bare feet making no sound on the tile. He stopped behind her, looking at their reflection in the mirror. He didn't look at the jagged hair with pity. He looked at it with quiet, burning resolve. "I look broken," Sadie whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracking down her cheek. "A broken bone heals thicker," Roman said softly. "It becomes the strongest part of the body." He unclasped the leather case and set it on the counter. Inside lay a straight razor, a shaving brush, and a heavy puck of expensive shaving soap. "They tried to brand you," Roman said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "They tried to make you carry their ugliness. But they don't get to finish the job. You do." He turned on the hot water. He took the brush and lathered the soap in a small ceramic bowl, the scent of sandalwood and bergamot filling the bathroom, replacing the phantom smell of the diner. He handed the brush to Sadie. She looked at it. Her hands were shaking. "Take it," Roman urged gently. Sadie took a deep breath. She raised the brush and began to paint the thick, warm lather over the ragged stubble on her head. The warmth was instantly soothing, a stark contrast to the cold violation of the clippers. She covered her entire scalp, coating the ugly patches and the scratches. Roman picked up the straight razor. He unfolded the heavy steel blade. But instead of raising it to her head, he offered it to her. "Handle first." "Take it back, Sadie," he whispered. Sadie looked at the razor. She looked at Roman in the mirror. He wasn't demanding. He was offering her the control that had been violently stolen from her the night before. She took the razor. The steel felt heavy, perfectly balanced in her grip. She raised her arm. She placed the edge of the blade against her temple. She met her own eyes in the mirror. The scared, tired waitress was gone. The woman looking back at her was something entirely different. She pulled the blade back, scraping away the lather and the last jagged remnants of her hair. She worked methodically. The scraping sound of the blade was rhythmic, almost meditative. She rinsed the blade in the hot water, tapping it against the porcelain sink. Stroke by stroke, she erased Trent Dempsey's handiwork. Roman stood behind her, watching in silence. He didn't interfere. He just stood as a silent guardian, giving her the space to reclaim herself. 10 minutes later, she set the razor down. She took a warm, damp towel and wiped the remaining lather from her head. She looked in the mirror. Her scalp was completely bare, smooth, vulnerable, but undeniably powerful. The scratches were still there, stark red lines against the pale skin. But they no longer looked like marks of humiliation. They looked like battle scars. She traced the long scratch behind her ear with her fingertip. "It's gone," she said. Her voice was quiet, but the tremor was gone. Roman stepped forward, wrapping his arms around her waist from behind. He pulled her back against his chest, burying his face into the crook of her neck. He pressed a soft kiss to her bare temple. "You are beautiful," he murmured, meaning every single word. Sadie leaned back into him, letting the tension drain out of her shoulders. She placed her hands over his, where they rested on her stomach. "The men," she said, looking at his reflection. "Trent and Logan." Roman's eyes darkened slightly, but his grip remained gentle. "They no longer exist." He didn't elaborate. He didn't tell her about the meatpacking plant, or the freezer, or Arthur Dempsey's destroyed life. He absorbed the sins so she wouldn't have to carry the weight of them. Sadie didn't ask for details. She knew what Roman was. She had always known. The diner had been her way of pretending she could keep one foot in a normal, consequence-free world. But last night proved that the normal world was just as cruel, only it lacked the power to protect itself. "I'm not going back," Sadie said quietly. "Not to the diner, not to that life." "I bought the diner," Roman said simply. "It burned down last night. Faulty wiring." Sadie let out a breath that was half a laugh, half a sob. "Of course it did." She turned in his arms, wrapping her hands around his neck. She looked up at the man who owned the city, the man who had burned down a bloodline just because they touched her. "I'm Sadie Rossi," she whispered, testing the full weight of the name on her tongue. It didn't feel like a cage anymore. It felt like armor. Roman smiled. It was a rare, genuine expression that didn't reach the terrifying depths of his public persona. It was meant only for her. "Yes, you are," Roman agreed, leaning down to capture her lips in a deep, bruising kiss. The city outside hummed with traffic and ignorant lives, completely unaware of the monsters walking among them. But Sadie didn't care. Let the world have its heroes. She preferred the monster who would tear the world apart to keep her safe. That's how a real boss handles business. Trent and Logan thought they were untouchable, but they learned the hard way that when you touch the queen, the king will burn your entire kingdom to the ground. What did you think of Roman's brutal revenge? Was it justified, or did he go too far? Let me know your thoughts down in the comments below. If you love this dark mafia romance, smash that like button, share this video with your friends, and don't forget to subscribe and ring the bell for more intense storytelling. Stay safe out there.